March 2nd, 1943, Wichita, Kansas. The night air hung heavy with the thrum of engines and the metallic scent of oil. Sparks danced off the concrete as welding torches hissed in the cavernous assembly hall of Boeing Plant 2. Inside, thousands of men and women moved with relentless rhythm, riveting, rolling, assembling. From the catwalks above, it looked like a city that never slept. But among the blur of motion and noise, one woman stood still, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Tressa Dale, 34 years old, lead process engineer, watched the line like a commander studying a battlefield. She could see the problem before anyone else did. The B-29 Superfortress, the most advanced bomber the world had ever seen, was choking its own production. Too big, too complex, too slow. The very machine meant to end the war in the Pacific might never make it there in time. She adjusted her goggles, the blueprints clutched under one arm, and muttered to herself, "We're building airplanes like they're Model Ts, and that's going to lose us this war." Around her, the Boeing Wichita plant pulsed with urgency. President Roosevelt had promised that the arsenal of democracy would outproduce every Axis factory combined. And Wichita, a city barely 110,000 strong, had become its beating heart. What had once been wheat fields were now rows of hangars stretching to the horizon, filled with workers from every corner of America. Housewives from Oklahoma, mechanics from Detroit, farmhands from Nebraska, all learning to rivet, weld, and fit aluminum skin. The B-29 was unlike anything before it. Pressurized cabins, remote-controlled gun turrets, 4 Wright R-3350 engines capable of pushing it to 350 miles per hour. It could fly above Japanese defenses and carry 20,000 pounds of bombs halfway across the Pacific. It was, as the general said, a weapon of impossible ambition. And it was up to people like Tressa Dale to make that ambition real. But right now, real looked like chaos. Parts arrived late. Tools were misplaced. Each bomber took nearly 2 weeks to complete, and that was when nothing went wrong, which it often did. The Army Air Forces were demanding hundreds. They barely had dozens. Tressa walked the line, notebook in hand, her eyes darting from fuselage to fuselage. "You," she said, stopping beside a young riveter no older than 20. "You're waiting on frame 4, right?" The woman nodded nervously. "They said it's still at Station B, ma'am." Tressa sighed. Station B, the bottleneck again. She pushed through a sea of uniforms and coveralls until she reached the offending section. There, half a dozen workers were struggling to fit an oversized bulkhead through a jig too narrow for it. The foreman swore under his breath. "It's the new spec again. Headquarters sent the wrong drawing." Tressa knelt beside the blueprint, pencil flying over paper. "No," she said finally. "Not wrong. Outdated." She tore a page from her notebook and handed it over. "Use this configuration. Rotate the frame, suspend it from the upper line, and feed it forward instead of sideways." The foreman hesitated. "That's not in the manual." "Neither was flying to Tokyo," she said flatly. "Do it." Minutes later, the entire flow of the section changed. Parts lifted overhead, the jig repositioned, workers adapting on instinct. Tressa stood back as the line found its rhythm again. For the first time in hours, progress. From the mezzanine, a senior manager in a crisp Army uniform had been watching her. Colonel James Wentworth, liaison from the Air Materiel Command. He descended the stairs, his boots echoing. "You're Tressa Dale," he said. "The one who keeps breaking procedure." She met his gaze without flinching. "If procedure worked, Colonel, you wouldn't be 6 months behind schedule." Wentworth's expression didn't change, but his tone softened. "You know what you're doing. I know what we have to do." The colonel nodded once. "Then prove it." That night, while the rest of Wichita slept, Tressa stayed behind. Under the hum of overhead lights, she spread a new design across the drafting table, not of the bomber, but of the factory itself. She wasn't building airplanes anymore. She was going to rebuild how airplanes were built. And if she succeeded, she would do what no one believed possible: turn Boeing's chaos into the fastest aircraft production line in the world. Outside, the Kansas wind howled across the empty runways, whispering the promise of what was yet to come. March 3, 1943. Boeing Plant 2, Wichita, Kansas. The dawn broke over a prairie sky streaked in silver and amber. Inside the plant, the first whistles sounded, 6:00 a.m., sharp. And the floor came alive once more. The rhythmic pounding of rivet guns and the shrill calls of foremen echoed through the massive hangars. But up on the second floor, above the din of the machinery, a light had never gone out. Tressa Dale hadn't slept. Her drafting table was littered with coffee cups, mechanical pencils, and the residue of eraser shavings that clung to every corner of her workspace. Across the table lay a vision, a new kind of production map, one that would change everything about how the B-29 was built. She called it flow assembly. To the untrained eye, it looked chaotic. A maze of arrows, workstations, conveyors, and overhead lifts. But to an engineer, and especially one like Tressa, it was a symphony of precision. No wasted steps, no idle hands. Each station fed directly into the next, every worker synchronized to the rhythm of a moving line rather than waiting for parts to come to them. It was inspired not by aviation, but by the automotive world, by Henry Ford's assembly lines. Yet it had to account for a plane that dwarfed any car. The B-29 was 99 feet long, with over 165,000 parts. It wasn't just about movement. It was about orchestration. At 7:30 a.m., she gathered her small team, engineers, supervisors, and a handful of the plant's most experienced workers. Among them was Margaret Maggie Leland, a former mechanic from Tulsa who'd worked her way up to floor forewoman. She was tough, quick-witted, and had a knack for solving problems with whatever tools she could find. Tressa pointed to the blueprint pinned to the wall. "We're going to rebuild Section C," she announced. "From the floor up." Maggie crossed her arms. "You mean shut it down? We're already behind schedule." "Not shut down," Tressa corrected. "Rewire it, piece by piece, while it runs." The men in the room exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a production engineer named Hal, frowned. "You're talking about moving live assembly while it's operating. That's dangerous." "It's also necessary," Tressa replied. "We can't afford another delay. Every day we lose is another crew flying outdated bombers into flak over the Marianas." There was silence. The only sound was the faint, distant roar of engines from the test field outside. Finally, Maggie spoke. "All right," she said. "Where do we start?" By noon, Section C was chaos. Machines were being relocated, cranes repositioned, ducts rerouted. Electricians swarmed the rafters while mechanics rolled out new guide rails. Workers were instructed to keep production moving, even as the floor around them transformed. To outside observers, it looked like madness. But under Tressa's supervision, every motion had purpose. She moved through the aisles like a conductor, calling orders, adjusting timing, sketching corrections directly on the floor with chalk. Her voice cut through the roar of the factory. "Keep the fuselage rolling at 12 feet per hour, no faster. Clamp the nose gear now. I don't want any drift when it hits Station D. Shift the wing assembly jig 5 degrees west. That'll give you clearance for the mount." The transformation wasn't just mechanical. It was human. For the first time, workers began to see themselves not as isolated cogs, but as part of a living system. The Rosies, the women riveters who'd become icons of the home front, took pride in how their sections fed seamlessly into the next. They worked shoulder to shoulder with men who, months earlier, had doubted their place on the line. In this new choreography, gender, age, and background mattered less than one thing: precision. By 5:00 p.m., the first section of the new flow line was operational. The fuselage moved smoothly from frame to frame, parts arriving just in time, tools in hand, no waiting. The efficiency increase was immediate, measurable. Tressa watched the gauges tick upward on the monitoring board. Output had risen 18% in a single shift. Colonel Wentworth reappeared that evening, clipboard in hand, a faint smirk on his face. "I heard you turn Section C into a racetrack," he said. Tressa wiped a smear of graphite from her palm. "Call it what you like, Colonel." "It's working." He looked over the blueprint. "You're suggesting we replicate this across the entire plant?" "Yes," she said. "Within 60 days." He chuckled. "You're bold." "I'm right," she said simply. He studied her for a long moment before nodding. "All right, Miss Dale. You've got 60 days. But if this goes wrong, you'll answer to Washington." That night, as the sun dipped behind the flat Kansas horizon, Tressa stood on the balcony overlooking the plant floor. Below her, sparks flew like fireflies beneath the steel skeletons of bombers-to-be. The rhythmic clang of rivets echoed into the night, a heartbeat of industry, of determination. She whispered under her breath, "We'll build them faster than anyone believes possible." And deep inside, she knew it wasn't just about airplanes. It was about proving that ingenuity, grit, and vision could win a war as surely as any weapon. March 10th, 1943. Boeing Plant 2, Wichita, Kansas. The factory floor trembled with the sound of hammers, presses, and human resolve. But behind the noise, behind the roar of rivet guns and the hiss of torches, there was tension. Not everyone shared Tressa Dale's faith in her new system. In one of the conference rooms overlooking the floor, a dozen engineers gathered around a long oak table. Cigarette smoke hung thick in the air, curling toward the flickering fluorescent lights. The walls were plastered with production charts, red lines marking goals unmet, black lines crawling sluggishly upward. At the head of the table stood Arthur "Red" Kincaid, Boeing's senior production manager. He was old school, 30 years in the industry, a man who believed airplanes were built by patience and craftsmanship, not speed and innovation. He jabbed a finger toward the chart. "We're already working double shifts, 7 days a week," he barked. "Now she wants to move the lines while we build on them? It's suicide. We'll lose more hours fixing accidents than we'll gain in efficiency." Tressa didn't flinch. "You said that about automated riveting, too," she replied evenly. "And it doubled our throughput." Kincaid scowled. "This isn't a car factory, Miss Dale. These are 4-engine bombers, 20 tons of precision. You can't treat them like Fords." "I'm not," she said, stepping closer. "I'm treating them like weapons. And the war doesn't care how polite our procedures are." A murmur rippled through the room. Some of the younger engineers glanced at each other, unsure whether to admire her courage or fear the fallout. Then Colonel Wentworth cleared his throat from the back of the room. "Mr. Kincaid," he said, "I've seen the reports. Dale's system improved Section C by 22% this week. If that holds across the line, we're looking at nearly doubling monthly output by summer." Kincaid snorted. "If it holds? If." Wentworth leaned forward, his tone hardening. "We don't have the luxury of ifs. The Pacific Theater's bleeding men every day because we can't get long-range bombers off the line fast enough. The president wants B-29s in the air, not excuses." Silence. Only the hum of the fluorescent lights filled the room. Tressa looked around the table, eyes sharp. "We can't outfly the enemy. We can't outgun them. But we can outbuild them, if we dare to change how we build." That afternoon, the factory doors rolled open to receive a fresh shipment of raw aluminum from Alcoa. Train cars clanked to a halt, steam hissing from the brakes. Forklifts darted back and forth, unloading sheets of gleaming metal. The supply lines were flowing, barely, But the Army Air Forces had already increased their demands again. Maggie Leland met Tressa at the line, wiping sweat from her brow. "You're not going to like this," she said, handing over a telegram. Tressa unfolded it. From Army Air Forces Command. Subject, accelerated delivery. New target, 150 aircraft by August 1944. Tressa's breath caught. 150? Maggie gave a dry laugh. "Yeah, that's what I said." Tressa folded the telegram, eyes distant. "Then we don't have time to prove this works. We just have to make it work." The next few weeks blurred into motion. Engineers worked through nights, drawing new conveyor routes, designing overhead gantries to move fuselage sections from one hull to another. Welders cut through steel supports to make way for automated lifts. Riveters, the Rosies, took pride in outpacing their previous records, counting not in parts, but in planes completed. "2 more today," one worker shouted, holding up her tally card. "Make it 3, her partner yelled back, smiling through her welding mask. They were exhausted, hungry, and often frightened. But they were also unstoppable. Still, accidents happened. A suspended wing section broke from its harness one afternoon, crashing onto a work table with a deafening roar. No one was hurt, but the sound froze the factory for minutes. When it was over, all eyes turned to Tressa. She didn't shout. She didn't panic. She climbed the scaffolding herself, inspected the failed cable, and said, "We'll reinforce it with double-lock clamps. If it failed once, it can fail again." That night, Maggie found her in the dim glow of the drafting room, shoulders slumped over blueprints. "You should rest," Maggie said softly. "I can't," Tressa replied. "We're still losing time at the midline transition. The tail section waits 40 minutes every cycle. 40 minutes. Maggie smiled faintly. "You're chasing minutes like they're bullets." Tressa looked up. "They are bullets. Every wasted minute here is one more life spent out there." She stared at the drawing again, fingers tracing the assembly flow. Then, slowly, a new idea took shape. She straightened, grabbed her pencil, and began sketching a new system. One that would tie every section of the line into a continuous motion assembly. It wasn't just speed, it was evolution. And when it was done, Boeing Wichita wouldn't just be a factory. It would be a weapon in itself. April 18th, 1943. Wichita, Kansas. Boeing Plant 2, Assembly Hangar 7. The thunder of machinery rolled like a living heartbeat through the hangar. Overhead, steel cranes creaked under the weight of aluminum fuselages. Beneath them, sparks cascaded like orange rain as welders sealed the seams of what would soon become the most formidable aircraft on Earth, the Boeing B-29 Superfortress. But today was different. Today, the factory was about to change forever. For weeks, Tressa Dale's new system had been under construction, a labyrinth of belts, rails, and suspended jigs designed to move entire bomber sections through the plant in one fluid motion. It was called the Dynamic Flow Assembly Line, and it had never been attempted on this scale before. At 7 a.m., the floor bosses gathered for what felt like a battle briefing. Maggie Leland stood at Tressa's side, her coveralls smudged with oil. Colonel Wentworth watched from a platform above, clipboard in hand, flanked by skeptical engineers who muttered among themselves. Tressa unrolled her final schematic on the table. "Every station feeds the next," she explained. "Fuselages will advance continuously, not stop-start. No waiting, no idle labor. Our goal: reduce total assembly time from 19 days to 9. Kincaid, the senior production manager, crossed his arms. 9 days. You'll tear the line apart before the first plane rolls off." Tressa met his gaze. "Then we'll rebuild it stronger." The room fell silent. At 7:15, the signal was given. The massive overhead cranes groaned to life, gears turning, motors humming. The first fuselage, silver and unpainted, began to move, inch by inch, down the new track. Workers followed alongside, tools in hand, completing their tasks as the bomber advanced. The line didn't stop. It flowed. At first, chaos threatened to erupt. One rivet team fell behind, another ran short of bolts. The timing between stations faltered. But then, slowly, rhythm took hold. Riveters passed their drills in practiced arcs. Fitters guided panels into place without a word. The bomber rolled forward like a living thing, slow, steady, relentless. Colonel Wentworth leaned over the railing. "I'll be damned," he whispered. "It's working." By mid-afternoon, the transformation was undeniable. The plant floor, once a battlefield of delays, now moved with near symphonic precision. The clanging of hammers and the hiss of torches blended into a mechanical melody, and Tressa, standing high on the observation deck, watched her creation breathe. Each section of the line acted like an organ, wings, fuselage, tail, working in synchronization. Raw aluminum entered one end of the plant. Completed bombers rolled out the other. The process was so fluid that workers began calling it the breathing machine. Maggie joined her at the railing. "You realize what you've done?" she asked. Tressa smiled faintly. "I think I just taught steel to dance." Still, progress came at a cost. The plant ran around the clock. 12-hour shifts blurred into 16. Workers slept in cots near their stations. The cafeteria served 10,000 meals a day, and the coffee never stopped flowing. A reporter from the Wichita Eagle arrived to document the miracle in motion. He asked Tressa for a quote. She wiped grease from her hands and said only, "We're not building airplanes, we're building victory." The article ran the next morning with the headline, "Boeing's Women Engineers Rewrite the Rules of War Production." For many, it was the first time they'd seen a woman's name, Tressa Dale, associated not with rivets, but with revolution. By May 1943, the results were undeniable. The factory's output had doubled. Delays dropped by more than half. For every skeptic silenced, another engineer wanted to join her team. Even the U.S. War Department took notice. In Washington, General Henry Hap Arnold read the reports with disbelief. He turned to his aide and said, "Find me this Dale woman. I want to know how she's doing what every damn factory in America says can't be done." One evening, as thunder rolled across the Kansas plains, Tressa walked the length of the plant alone. She moved from one glowing fuselage to another, tracing her fingers along the cold aluminum. Each bore a serial number, each destined for the skies over the Pacific. At the far end of the hangar, a young mechanic stopped her. He couldn't have been older than 19. "Ma'am," he said, voice uncertain, "do you think these planes will really end the war?" Tressa looked up at the towering silhouette of the bomber. "If they don't," she said quietly, "then at least we'll know we gave the men who fly them their best chance." The mechanic nodded and returned to work. The bomber rolled forward into the dark, the floor lights reflecting off its silver skin. The machine was breathing faster now, alive, unstoppable, feeding a war that demanded everything. And Tressa Dale, the woman who had dared to rebuild the impossible, was just getting started. June 11th, 1943. Wichita, Kansas, Boeing Plant 2, Engine Installation Bay. The air was thick with heat and oil. Overhead fans spun lazily, barely cutting through the smothering summer humidity. Rows of gleaming Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone engines, each one a thunderous heart of 200 horsepower, sat on wooden pallets waiting for installation. The new flow assembly line had transformed the fuselage sections. But now came the hardest part, integrating the engines, the B-29's most temperamental and terrifying component. Each power plant weighed nearly a ton and contained more than 3,000 precision parts. At high altitude, even a small malfunction could turn the bomber into a fireball. Tressa Dale stood near the test rig, her coveralls streaked with graphite and sweat. She was watching as one of the mechanics, a lanky kid from Missouri, struggled to align a propeller hub. The socket wrench slipped, clanging to the floor. "Careful," she called. "That hub's off by half a degree. Force it and you'll shear the coupling." The mechanic swallowed, nodded, and adjusted. She knelt beside him, tightening the calibration gauge herself, her hand steady despite the trembling metal. "You know," he said, glancing up, "they say these engines are cursed. Burned too hot, valves stick, oil fires." Tressa smiled without looking up. "They said the same thing about electricity once." She turned the wrench with a sharp click. "The trick isn't fighting the heat. It's teaching the machine to live with it." That evening, the plant's night shift clocked in as the Kansas sky turned a bruised red. The dynamic flow assembly now reached full capacity. 24-hour motion. Fuselages, wings, and engines moved continuously through their stations. The noise was constant, relentless, like thunder bottled and multiplied. But the new system faced its greatest challenge yet: integration with final assembly and flight testing. The goal wasn't just to build faster, it was to build right. One misstep, one faulty wire or loose bolt could destroy months of work and kill a crew of 11 men in the skies over Japan. Tressa's office, if it could be called that, was a small corner above the main floor, cluttered with blueprints, parts catalogs, and coffee tins filled with pencils. Her engineers filed in with updates every hour. "Station 47 reports overheating during test spins," said Hal, one of her senior techs. "Tolerance on the turbocharger?" she asked without looking up. "Half a millimeter out." "Bring it down to 0.3. That'll fix the blowback," she said. "And check the oil line routing. It's been choking the pressure gauge on startup." Maggie leaned against the doorframe. "You ever sleep, boss?" Tressa smirked. "Not until they stopped calling these things cursed." Weeks passed, and the cursed engines began to purr like tamed beasts. The secret wasn't luck. It was data. Tressa had begun collecting metrics from every station: torque readings, pressure levels, build times. She charted them nightly on a massive wall map, each number a heartbeat in the living organism that was Boeing Plant 2. Her process wasn't just engineering, it was prediction. When an engine started showing signs of valve failure, she could trace it back to the moment it was installed, identify the worker who fitted it, and retrain the team before the flaw became systemic. She'd built not only a factory that flowed, but one that learned. And soon, it was producing results even Washington couldn't ignore. By August 1943, the Wichita plant was completing one B-29 every 63 hours. A number so staggering that the Air Material Command sent a film crew to document it. They captured rows of women in bandanas and goggles, their hands steady as they riveted the silver skin of the bombers. Men on ladders wiring control panels, engines being hoisted into place by synchronized cranes. The film, released months later, would carry the voiceover. In the heart of America, a new kind of army fights with aluminum and precision. Here, in Wichita, engineers and workers, men and women alike, have taught steel to fly. But while production soared, pressure mounted. The Pacific War was dragging on. Reports from the Solomon Islands and the Gilberts told of fierce resistance. The Army Air Forces were desperate for a bomber that could reach Tokyo. General Hap Arnold himself sent word. The B-29 must be ready for combat by spring. No excuses. It was an impossible demand. And yet that word no longer carried weight with Tressa Dale. One evening, as she walked through the final assembly hangar, she stopped to watch a team preparing a freshly finished bomber for its test flight. The serial number gleamed under the floodlights, 426221. The engines roared to life, shaking the floor. Workers cheered as the aircraft taxied to the runway. Maggie appeared beside her, arms crossed, hair wind-tossed from the prop wash. "That one's yours, Tressa. The first full B-29 built start to finish under your system." Tressa watched as the bomber lifted gracefully into the sky, the setting sun flashing off its wings. "No," she said softly. "It's ours." The roar faded into the Kansas night. For the first time, she allowed herself a rare, fleeting smile. The machine had learned to breathe, and now it could fly. July 30th, 1943. Boeing Plant 2, Airfield, Wichita, Kansas. The morning sun cut through a haze of engine smoke and heat mirage, bathing the airfield in gold. The first flight of a fully flow-line-built B-29 was about to begin. Test pilot Edwin "Eddie" Larson, a former mail plane flyer turned Army contractor, stood beneath the towering bomber, helmet in hand. Its silver skin gleamed like liquid light, its four R-3350 engines idling with a deep, resonant growl. Tressa Dale stood beside Colonel Wentworth near the hangar doors, clipboard tight in her hands. This was the culmination of everything. Months of sleepless nights, 1,000 revisions, and the gamble of an idea no one had believed could work. Eddie looked down from the cockpit window and shouted over the engine noise. "She's a beauty, Miss Dale. You sure she's ready to dance?" Tressa raised her voice above the roar. "She's been ready since the day we taught her to move." With a salute, Eddie throttled up. The engines thundered, propellers whipping the air into cyclones of dust. The B-29 rumbled forward, gathering speed down the long concrete runway. The ground shook. Then, with an almost delicate lift, it rose. The crowd of workers and engineers erupted into cheers. Hands shot skyward, voices echoing through the open fields. For a brief, defiant moment, the war felt far away. Inside the plant, production was now a living organism. Each shift overlapped the next like gears in a clock. Workers moved in practiced rhythm, guided by the soft chime of interval bells that marked the transfer of assemblies. Tressa's innovations had spread beyond Wichita. Representatives from Boeing's Seattle and Renton plants had come to observe her methods firsthand. They followed her through the line, notebooks in hand. "You're treating assembly like a symphony," said one engineer from Renton. "Every station plays its note, perfectly timed." Tressa nodded. "A factory that moves must have music. You just have to listen for it." Her reputation was growing. But so was the weight of what came next. The U.S. Army Air Forces wanted mass deployment by early 1944. That meant doubling capacity, again. In August, a heat wave struck Kansas. Temperatures inside the plant soared past 100 degrees. Workers tied wet rags around their necks, drinking from tin cups between shifts. Yet the line never stopped. Maggie Leland's voice boomed over the noise. "Let's move it, girls. You think Tokyo's gonna wait for the weather?" Her crew, Rosie the Riveter incarnate, cheered and got back to work. Tressa walked among them, handing out cold lemonade from a battered pitcher. "You all right, May?" she asked one woman, tightening bolts on the nose section. May smiled weakly. "Just wish the fans blew harder, ma'am." Tressa grinned. "If we build 'em fast enough, maybe we'll make our own wind." But as output climbed, so did the risks. One evening, a fire broke out near the engine test stands. A backdraft caused by an overpressurized fuel line. Alarms shrieked. Workers scattered as flames licked the walls. Tressa raced toward the blaze with a group of firefighters, face streaked with sweat and soot. The heat was blinding. Fuel drums hissed, threatening to explode. But she saw it. The cutoff valve at the base of the line, half obscured by debris. Without thinking, she dove through the smoke, wrenching it closed with both hands. The fire dimmed, then died. Coughing, she stumbled back as the plant's sprinklers kicked in. Maggie grabbed her shoulders. "Jesus, Tressa! You could have been killed." Tressa spat blackened water and coughed again. "And let it take the line with it? Not a chance." That night, she returned to her office, her hair still smelling faintly of smoke. Across her desk lay a telegram, one she hadn't seen in days, buried under reports. It read, "From U.S. Army Air Forces, Washington, D.C. To Tressa Dale, Boeing, Wichita. Subject, urgent deployment request. New deadline, February 1st, 1944. Priority mission, Silverplate. She frowned. The name meant nothing yet. Silverplate. But the deadline? That was impossible even by her standards. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her eyes. They're going to need more than speed, she murmured. They're going to need miracles. The next morning, she called her team together. Silverplate, she began, isn't just another order. It's a new design, a modified B-29. Lighter frame, reinforced bomb bay. The brass says it's top secret. Hal frowned. Top secret how? Enough that they won't tell us why, Tressa replied. But they want prototypes ready before spring. Maggie gave a low whistle. And you think we can manage that on top of the regular line? Tressa looked out over the factory floor, where dozens of bombers in varying states of completion gleamed under the lights. We'll have to. We're not just building planes anymore. She paused, her voice quiet but firm. We're building the end of this war. That night, a storm rolled across the prairie. Lightning flashed over the hangars, illuminating the outlines of the half-built B-29s inside. The rain battered the tin roofs like artillery fire. But the factory kept running. Night shift in full swing, machines singing in defiance of the storm. Tressa stood alone at the observation window, the thunder shaking the glass. In her reflection, behind the streaks of rain, she saw it all. The lines, the workers, the movement, an empire of aluminum and resolve. And though she could not know it yet, the secret project called Silverplate would soon turn her factory into the birthplace of a weapon that would change history forever. September 3rd, 1943. Boeing Plant 2, Wichita, Kansas. The morning whistle sounded at 0600 hours sharp, but the plant floor was already humming, quieter than usual, heavier somehow. Gone were the reporters, the visiting officers, the curious factory tours. Where there had been cameras, there were now guards, armed ones. Word spread fast among the workers. New blueprints arrived under military escort, stamped classified. Silverplate. Engineers whispered about modifications and payload testing, but no one could piece together the whole truth, except for Tressa Dale. She stood in a newly fenced section of the plant, Hangar 12, now sealed off from the rest. Only authorized personnel could enter. Even Maggie, her right hand since the start, had been denied clearance. Inside, 2 B-29 fuselages sat under tarps, stripped and gleaming under floodlights. Colonel Wentworth stepped forward, his voice low. You're wondering what you've gotten yourself into. I stopped wondering that months ago, Tressa said. What I'm wondering is why we're redesigning the bomb bay of a $600,000 aircraft when it already works perfectly. Wentworth hesitated, then motioned toward a man in civilian clothes. Tall, with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of calm reserved for scientists. Miss Dale, meet Dr. Norman Ramsey. He's with the Office of Scientific Research and Development. Ramsey extended his hand. You've built the most efficient aircraft production line in the world. We need that same efficiency, but for something much larger. Tressa frowned. Larger than a 20,000-pound bomb? Ramsey looked at her for a long moment. Let's just say, it will be heavier in consequence. Over the next weeks, secrecy became routine. Workers signed new contracts forbidding discussion of anything seen in Hangar 12. Windows were blacked out. Plans were coded with meaningless labels. Type C, Bay X, Compartment Delta. Tressa oversaw every modification herself. The changes were subtle but deliberate. A longer bomb bay, reinforced release mechanisms, custom wiring for an unusual load distribution system. No one told her what kind of weapon required it. But she could feel the gravity in every silence. One night, she confronted Colonel Wentworth. You're turning my factory into something else, she said. And I deserve to know what for. Wentworth studied her for a long time before answering. The scientists believe this could end the war in one strike. Her eyes narrowed. One strike? Yes, he said quietly. One. She turned away. the words echoing in her mind like the distant roll of thunder. By November, Wichita had become a fortress of secrecy. Train cars bearing Silverplate components arrived under armed guard. Engineers from Los Alamos came and went in unmarked vehicles. The workers called them the Ghost Men. Even Maggie noticed the shift. "Feels different around here," she told Tressa over a rare cup of coffee. "Quieter, heavier, like everyone's working under a shadow." Tressa nodded. "They are. We all are." "Any idea what it is?" Maggie asked. Tressa looked down at her cup, the steam curling upward. "Something powerful enough they think it'll end everything." Maggie frowned. "End the war?" Tressa didn't answer. Meanwhile, the flow line ran smoother than ever. Planes rolled out daily, so many that the sky above Wichita filled with silver shapes by dusk. Factory output had reached a new record, one B-29 every 56 hours. In Washington, General Hap Arnold called it a logistical miracle. But on the ground, Tressa felt something colder. The more perfect the system became, the closer it brought them to something monstrous, something she couldn't yet name. One late evening, as she reviewed production logs, Dr. Ramsey appeared in her doorway. "You look tired," he said gently. She smirked faintly. "That's become my resting state." He hesitated, then said, "You should know. The first Silverplate prototype will be flown out within the month to New Mexico." "Los Alamos?" He nodded. "They'll be testing integration. When the time comes, your factory's efficiency will be remembered, but not your name." Tressa exhaled slowly. "That's fine. I didn't do this for names." Ramsey studied her face. "You built a machine that can build anything. Let's hope what we're building is peace." The night he left, Tressa walked the line one last time. The machines hissed and clattered like living creatures. Their movements now so fluid, they seemed almost conscious. The air smelled of hot oil and steel and human will. She paused beside a completed B-29, its nose painted with a single word, victory. Her hand brushed the aluminum surface. It was cool to the touch, beautiful, perfect. But she knew, deep down, that somewhere within the heart of her creation, inside those bomb bays she had redesigned, lay something too powerful for anyone to truly control. She whispered to herself, "We built the impossible." Then, after a long pause, "God help us for it." January 12th, 1944, Wichita, Kansas, Boeing Plant 2, main assembly floor. The new year arrived, not with celebration, but with exhaustion. The Wichita plant roared through the winter like a furnace that could never be cooled. The dynamic flow line, once a symbol of human ingenuity, now devoured shifts, hours, and people. Every day, more bombers rolled out onto the tarmac, each gleaming and perfect. Every night, telegrams from Washington demanded more. 150 aircraft by August, no delays, no excuses. Tressa Dale had become a ghost in her own factory. Her once sharp eyes were rimmed with fatigue, her voice raspier than before. Yet she remained relentless. Every malfunction, every delay, every injury was logged and corrected. Her notebooks were filled with sketches, formulas, and scrawled notes written at 2 a.m. But beneath the efficiency, beneath the rhythm and precision, the factory was bleeding. Maggie Leland burst into Tressa's office one cold morning, her coveralls dusted with frost. "You need to see this," she said. They crossed the hangar floor, stepping through the noise and glare until they reached the base of Line 4. There, a crowd had gathered. A worker, a young man from Illinois, lay on the ground beside a stalled conveyor, his leg crushed under a dropped engine mount. The medics were already there, shouting orders. Tressa's heart twisted. It wasn't the first accident. It wasn't even the worst. But every one of them carved deeper into her. After the medics left, she stood motionless, staring at the pool of oil that shimmered black beneath the floodlights. Maggie placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's not your fault, Tress. He was where he shouldn't have been. Tressa didn't move. He was where I told him to be. Her voice cracked. We've turned this place into a machine so efficient, it's forgotten it's run by people. Maggie looked around, at the rows of women and men still at their stations, faces pale but determined. Then maybe it's time we remind it. That night, the two women called a halt. A complete stop of the line. For the first time in nearly a year, Boeing Plant 2 fell silent. The workers stood uncertain, rivet guns idle in their hands. Colonel Wentworth arrived within minutes, fury written across his face. "What the hell is this?" he barked. "You can't shut down production without authorization." Tressa faced him squarely. "If we keep pushing at this pace, Colonel, you'll have your planes." But no one left to build them. He glared at her. "We are at war, Miss Dale. You think the boys flying over Tokyo get to take breaks?" She stepped closer, voice low and steady. "No. But they get to come home if these planes are built right. You want perfection? Then you give these people a day to breathe." Wentworth's jaw clenched. He was about to reply when the factory whistle blew. Not the usual start signal, but 3 long blasts, the agreed emergency code. The entire plant froze. Then, one by one, machines powered down. Sparks died. The hum of engines faded to silence. And in that quiet, Tressa Dale climbed onto the catwalk above the floor and looked down at the thousands of faces turned toward her. "I know what they call us," she said, her voice echoing through the steel rafters. "Rosies, riveters, mechanics, dreamers. They think we're just hands on a line. But look around you. This isn't just a line, it's the heart of a nation. And hearts don't beat if you tear them apart." The silence deepened. Even Wentworth said nothing. Tressa continued. "Tomorrow, we rest. The day after that, we come back stronger. Because when we build for them. The ones flying, the ones waiting, the ones who never came home." She stepped down, and no one argued. The following morning, the factory was quiet. Eerily so. Workers arrived to find hot coffee and warm bread waiting at their stations, courtesy of Maggie and the kitchen crew. For one day, the machine slept. People laughed, shared cigarettes, wrote letters home. Some simply sat on the wings of half-finished bombers and stared out at the Kansas horizon. When the line restarted the next day, something had changed. The noise was the same, but the spirit was lighter. Production didn't slow. It increased. The rest had sharpened the edge. Even Colonel Wentworth had to admit it in his report. Dale's unsanctioned shutdown resulted in a 14% efficiency boost post-restart. Recommend further study of morale effects. By spring, the Silverplate modifications were complete. The first fully modified aircraft left the line under heavy guard. It bore no serial number, no insignia, just a small black stencil near the cockpit, SP-1. Tressa watched as it disappeared into the clouds. She didn't know where it was going. She didn't know what it carried. But she knew deep down that it was more than just another bomber. The machine she'd built, the factory she'd designed to fight a war, was now feeding something beyond war itself. That night, she stood outside the plant, the prairie wind cold on her face. In the distance, the hum of the assembly floor never ceased. Even when she turned away, it echoed behind her like a memory that refused to fade. Maggie joined her, lighting a cigarette. "You think this will end it?" Tressa didn't answer right away. "If it doesn't," she said finally, "then maybe nothing ever will." They stood there together as the night swallowed the horizon, the sound of industry rolling on, steady, unstoppable, eternal. June 15, 1944. Wichita, Kansas. Boeing Plant 2 airfield. The air shimmered with heat, and the roar of engines drowned every other sound. Rows of B-29s, polished and fierce, stood lined up like a squadron of giants awaiting release. The first combat-ready superfortresses were about to depart for the Pacific. Their silver hulls caught the Kansas sun like mirrors, reflecting the faces of the men and women who had built them. Tressa Dale stood near the flight line, her coveralls stained with graphite, a rolled blueprint clutched in one hand. Beside her, Maggie Leland shielded her eyes as another bomber taxied forward, its 4 propellers chopping the air into violent wind. "That one's heading for India," Maggie shouted over the noise. "Part of Operation Matterhorn." Tressa nodded. "They'll be flying over the Himalayas, the hump. Can they make it?" Tressa looked at the bomber's powerful silhouette lifting into the haze. They can now. By midsummer, the Wichita plant had become the single largest producer of B-29s in the world. More than 16,000 workers, nearly half of them women, labored around the clock under Tressa's flow line system. The once quiet city had become a living engine of war. The Army Air Forces sent regular dispatches. B-29s, bombing rail yards in Bangkok, refineries in Palembang, factories in Kyushu. Every report carried a strange mix of pride and dread for Tressa. She had built the means, but she could not control what they became once they left her hands. Late one night, she received an envelope marked "Personal, Confidential." Inside was a letter from Colonel Wentworth, now stationed in Washington. The first Silverplate modified B-29s have been delivered successfully. You may hear little of them, but their contribution is considered vital to final victory. Continue production, maintain secrecy. Tressa read it twice. She didn't like the tone, final, clinical, as if the work itself had begun to eclipse the people behind it. She walked the empty floor afterward, listening to the silence between the machines. For months, she'd heard their rhythm like a living pulse. Tonight, it sounded mechanical again. Cold, tireless, inhuman. She whispered into the emptiness, "Don't let this become just metal and numbers." By August, the Pacific skies were filled with the thunder of B-29s. They struck at Saipan, Tinian, Truk, names that, until then, had been dots on a map pinned to Tressa's wall. Each dot now represented hundreds of lives. Maggie came into her office one afternoon carrying a newspaper. "They're saying the B-29 raids are working," she said, dropping it on the desk. "Tokyo's burning." Tressa stared at the headline. "Superfortresses pound Japanese homeland." Her throat tightened. "It's what we built them for." "Then why do you look like you lost something?" Maggie asked quietly. Tressa didn't answer. She could still hear the line running, still see the faces of the men and women who'd poured their sweat into every rivet. She thought of the Silverplate bombers, the secret ones, and the scientist's words echoed again, heavier in consequence. That night, she wrote in her notebook, "We've taught machines to move faster than human hands can think. I hope we never forget what they were made for, and what they can destroy." In December, as snow swept across Kansas, Tressa received an unexpected visitor. A young lieutenant from Washington, crisp in his uniform, carrying a sealed order. He handed it to her. "Authorization to expand production," he said. "The War Department wants a new annex, larger, faster. They're calling it the Victory Expansion." Tressa opened the envelope, scanning the paperwork. It was staggering. New hangars, more shifts, another 1,000 workers. The lieutenant hesitated. "Ma'am, the colonel asked me to tell you, your work here has been noted at the highest levels. You'll be recommended for a presidential commendation." She looked up from the paper. "I didn't do this for medals?" He nodded awkwardly. "Yes, ma'am, but you did it." After he left, Tressa sat alone in the vast office that overlooked the factory floor. Outside, the night shift had begun again. The lights burned like constellations in the dark, the hum of machinery stretching on without pause. Maggie knocked once and stepped inside. "New expansion?" "Bigger," Tressa said. "Faster." Maggie smiled faintly. "That what you wanted?" Tressa turned toward the window, the glow of the plant reflecting in her eyes. "It's what they wanted." She rested her hands on the cold glass. But sometimes I wonder if the faster we build, the closer we get to something we can't undo. The wind howled outside. Beyond the runways, the silver shapes of the bombers gleamed under the floodlights. Beautiful, terrible, waiting. February 26th, 1945. Wichita, Kansas, Boeing Plant 2, Design Office. The winter wind rattled the high windows as snow drifted across the runway outside. Inside, the hum of machines was softer now, steadier, like the slow breathing of something that had finally learned control. The B-29s had left in waves for Saipan, Guam, and Tinian. Every few days, telegrams came back confirming missions flown, targets hit, crews lost. The war had reached its most brutal chapter, and Tressa Dale's machines, her machines, were carrying it. She sat alone in her office, a cup of black coffee gone cold beside her. On her drafting table lay the plans for yet another Silverplate modification. She'd long stopped asking what each change meant. Lighter bay doors, reinforced latches, new wiring to handle payloads of special configuration. Every detail was clinical, sterile, but it felt heavier than steel. Maggie entered quietly, shutting the door behind her. "They're calling you to D.C., she said. "Colonel Wentworth wired through this morning. Something about a commendation and results." Tressa looked up. "Results?" Maggie nodded. "They're saying your Silverplate planes are the only ones that can carry the new weapon." Tressa's pencil rolled off the table and clattered to the floor. She didn't pick it up. March 10th, 1945, Wichita Airfield. The morning sky was black with exhaust. A fleet of B-29s, more than 300 strong, took off in formation, each one assembled under her system. They were bound for Tokyo. Tressa stood at the edge of the tarmac, coat pulled tight against the wind. Beside her, Maggie held the latest dispatch sheet. "They're carrying firebombs this time," Maggie said quietly. "Napalm, whole city blocks." Tressa didn't respond. The thunder of takeoff rolled over them, so loud it felt like the earth itself was shaking. When the noise faded, she turned away. "You ever wonder," she said softly, "if building faster meant we stopped thinking about what we were building for?" Maggie's voice broke slightly. "You gave them a chance to end it. That's what matters." Tressa didn't look at her. "Maybe." That night, news reached Wichita. Tokyo burned for 16 hours straight. More than 100,000 lives, gone in a single night. The next morning, the factory ran at full speed. Orders for more aircraft poured in. The war machine was unstoppable now. July 26th, 1945. Boeing Plant 2, Hangar 12. The Silverplate bombers were finished. 14 of them. Each one perfect. Each one shrouded in secrecy. The crews who arrived to ferry them out were polite but distant. Men who spoke in code, who didn't smile. Tressa oversaw the last inspection herself. As she ran her hands over the polished skin of the final bomber, she noticed the name freshly painted beneath the cockpit. Enola Gay. She froze. "Whose idea was that?" she asked one of the painters. He shrugged. "The pilot's, ma'am. Says it's after his mother." Her hand lingered on the silver letters. For the first time in months, she felt the weight of every bolt, every line of code, every idea she'd fought to bring to life. Colonel Wentworth appeared behind her. He looked older now, thinner, his eyes carrying something like regret. "It's leaving for Tinian tomorrow," he said. "You've done your part?" Tressa didn't turn. "Do you even know what they're carrying?" Wentworth hesitated. "I know it's meant to finish this." "Finish," she whispered. "That's what we keep saying. But what if it doesn't?" Wentworth had no answer. August 6th, 1945, Wichita, Kansas. The telegram arrived before dawn. Maggie burst into the office, breathless. "They did it," she said, voice trembling. "The Silverplate. They dropped it on a city, Hiroshima." Tressa's world tilted in. She gripped the edge of the table as Maggie read the message aloud. They say one plane, one, leveled everything. My God, Tress, it worked. Tressa closed her eyes. The hum of the factory, the distant engines warming up for another day's shift, all faded to nothing. It worked, she repeated, voice hollow. Outside, the morning whistle blew. Workers streamed in, unaware of what had happened half a world away. The line moved. The machines began their rhythm. The living heartbeat of Boeing Plant 2 went on, steady, efficient, obedient. Tressa walked to the observation window. The sun was rising, gold and cruel, over a world that would never be the same. She whispered to herself, almost too quietly to hear. We built the impossible, and now the impossible has learned to burn. 2 days later, she submitted her resignation. Her letter was one sentence long. The machine no longer needs me. Maggie found her standing by the runway as another B-29 lifted off into the endless blue. Where will you go? She asked. Home, Tressa said. Somewhere quiet. Maggie nodded. You think they'll remember us? Tressa looked at the departing bomber, a silver dot against the sky. They'll remember what we built, she said, not who we were. The engines roared one last time, fading into distance. And as Wichita returned to its hum, Tressa Dale, the woman who had taught steel to breathe, who had built faster than anyone thought possible, turned away from the machine she'd created. The world was already moving on.